I never thought a $200 fine would destroy an entire HOA board, but when Martha Henderson slapped that violation notice on my door, she had no idea she was about to mess with someone who could end her little power trip with the stroke of a pen. My name is Judge David Chen, and I've been presiding over federal cases for 12 years. I've seen corrupt politicians, white-collar criminals, and constitutional violations that would make your head spin. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the legal nightmare I was about to unleash on Willow Creek Estates HOA. They thought they could intimidate me with their fake authority and made-up rules. They had no clue they were about to face someone who actually understands what real legal power looks like. Comment which country you're watching from, because this story is about to get wild. What started as harassment over my garden gnomes ended with federal charges and a lawsuit that made national news. Here's how I took down the most corrupt HOA in suburban Chicago. Let me paint you the picture. Willow Creek Estates sounds fancy, right? It's actually a middle-class neighborhood in Oak Brook, Illinois, where houses go for about $400,000 and everyone pretends their little slice of suburbia is some exclusive country club. My wife Sarah and I moved here 3 years ago, after I got my appointment to the Northern District of Illinois Federal Courthouse. We wanted something quiet, safe for our twin daughters Emma and Sophie, who were starting high school. The house was perfect, colonial style, big backyard, and most importantly, it was supposed to be peaceful. But peace was the last thing we got thanks to Martha Henderson, the HOA president, who ran our neighborhood like her personal dictatorship. Picture a woman in her late 50s, perfectly styled blonde hair, always wearing those fake Chanel blazers from TJ Maxx, and carrying a clipboard like it was Excalibur. Martha lived for drama and control, and she'd made enemies with half the neighborhood over the pettiest violations you could imagine. There was Bob Williams on Maple Street, who got fined for having his trash cans visible from the street for exactly 6 minutes past pickup time. The Martinez family received $300 in fines because their daughter's chalk art on their own driveway was considered unsightly graffiti. And don't get me started on poor Mrs. Patterson, an 80-year-old widow who got cited for having non-conforming bird feeders. But Martha's favorite target? Me. And it all started with my garden gnomes. Now I know what you're thinking, garden gnomes. Really? But these weren't just any gnomes. They were handcrafted ceramic pieces my daughters had painted during our summer vacation in Colorado. 6 little gnomes, each one unique, sitting peacefully in our front flower bed. Emma had painted one to look like a tiny judge with a black robe. Sophie made hers look like a superhero. They were adorable, meaningful, and completely within our property lines. Martha hated them from day one. The harassment started small. First it was a friendly reminder in my mailbox about maintaining neighborhood aesthetics. Then came the formal notice citing some obscure bylaw about decorative fixtures requiring HOA approval. I read through our HOA documents, all 237 pages of them, and found nothing prohibiting garden decorations on private property. So I ignored it. Big mistake. 2 weeks later, I found Martha standing in my driveway at 7 in the morning, camera in hand, photographing my gnomes like they were evidence in a murder trial. When I stepped outside in my bathrobe, she started lecturing me about property values and neighborhood standards. Judge Chen, she said with that condescending smile, I'm sure you understand the importance of following rules. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was someone trying to lecture a federal judge about following rules while she was clearly making them up as she went along. Martha, I replied calmly, show me exactly where in our HOA covenants it prohibits garden decorations. She couldn't, because it didn't exist. But Martha wasn't done. Over the next month she escalated. Formal violation letters started arriving weekly, first for the gnomes. Then she claimed my mailbox was the wrong shade of black. My lawn was inadequately maintained, despite being professionally landscaped. Even my daughter's bicycles parked in our own garage with the door open became a storage violation. Each letter came with escalating fines. $50, $100. The final notice was for $200, with a threat of a lien on our property if I didn't comply immediately. That's when Martha made her fatal mistake. She didn't just fine me, she had the audacity to include a letter demanding I appear before the HOA board for a disciplinary hearing, where I would be required to explain my continued defiance of community standards. I'd been patient, I'd been diplomatic. I tried reasoning with someone who clearly had no interest in reason, but demanding that a sitting federal judge appear before her little kangaroo court for made-up violations. That crossed a line. What would you do if your HOA started making up rules just to harass you? Because what I did next, turn Martha's little power game into a federal case. I started digging, and when a federal judge with 30 years of legal experience starts investigating, you better believe I find things. I began with a simple public records request: HOA financial documents, board meeting minutes, correspondence files, all of it legally accessible under Illinois state law. What I found made my blood boil. Martha and her board weren't just power hungry, they were stealing. Thousands of dollars in HOA dues were being funneled into personal accounts. Landscaping contracts were being awarded to Martha's brother-in-law at triple the market rate. The legal fees line item in our budget, that was Martha's daughter, fresh out of law school, billing the HOA $200 an hour for basic administrative work. But the smoking gun was the violation system itself. Martha and her cronies were systematically targeting homeowners who opposed them, fabricating violations to generate revenue and force out dissidents. My neighbor Jim Rodriguez had been hit with $4,000 in fines after he questioned the board's decision to hire Martha's nephew for pool maintenance. This wasn't just harassment, it was racketeering, fraud and conspiracy rolled into one tidy little suburban crime syndicate. The disciplinary hearing was scheduled for a Thursday evening in the community center. Martha had invited what seemed like half the neighborhood, clearly expecting to make an example of me. She'd set up a long table with 5 chairs for the board members, positioned like they were presiding over some kind of trial. I walked in at exactly 7 p.m., carrying a manila folder and wearing my best courtroom expression, the one that made seasoned attorneys nervous. Martha was already there, shuffling papers importantly, flanked by her 4 board cronies who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Judge Chen," Martha announced loudly, "thank you for finally deciding to appear. We have serious matters to discuss regarding your continued violations." I set my folder on the table and looked directly at her. "Martha, before we begin, I need to inform you that you and your entire board are under federal investigation." The room went dead silent. Martha's confident smile faltered for just a second before she tried to recover. That's ridiculous. You can't intimidate us with empty threats." I opened my folder and pulled out the first document. "This is a federal grand jury subpoena for all HOA financial records, issued yesterday afternoon. This," I held up another paper, "is a warrant for the seizure of your personal banking records. And this," I placed the final document on the table, "is your Miranda warning, because Martha, you're about to be arrested for federal mail fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering." The color drained from her face. Board member Tom Wilson actually got up and left without saying a word. The other 3 were frantically whispering among themselves. "You can't do this," Martha stammered. "You're just one judge. You don't have jurisdiction over HOA matters." I smiled, the same smile I used when defense attorneys walked into obvious traps. "You're absolutely right, Martha. I don't have jurisdiction over HOA disputes, but I do have jurisdiction over federal crimes. And when you use the U.S. Postal Service to send fraudulent violation notices, when you conspired to defraud homeowners through fabricated fines, when you laundered money through fake contracts, that became my jurisdiction." She was trapped, and she knew it. This wasn't some neighbor she could bully or intimidate. This was a federal judge who just spent months building an airtight case against her little crime ring. "The FBI is outside right now," I continued calmly. "You have 2 choices. You can resign immediately, return every penny you've stolen, and cooperate with the investigation. Or you can explain to a federal jury why you thought you could run a criminal enterprise through a homeowners association." Martha Henderson, the woman who'd terrorized an entire neighborhood with fake authority, completely crumbled. What happened next was beautiful justice in action. Martha resigned that night, along with the entire board. Within a week, FBI agents had seized their financial records and traced over $40,000 in fraudulent transactions. The fake contracts, inflated legal fees, and systematic harassment scheme were all documented in black and white. Martha Henderson pled guilty to federal mail fraud and conspiracy charges. She received 18 months in federal prison and was ordered to pay full restitution to every homeowner she'd targeted. Her cronies on the board received probation and community service, but they all lost their jobs and reputations in the process. The HOA itself was completely restructured. New bylaws, new board, new management company, everything designed to prevent another Martha Henderson from taking control. My garden gnomes, they became legendary in the neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson started a whole gnome garden of her own, and suddenly everyone was displaying the decorations they'd been too afraid to put out before. But the best part was watching Martha during her sentencing hearing. The woman who'd carried herself like some suburban dictator stood in my courtroom wearing an orange jumpsuit, looking small and defeated. When I sentenced her, I made sure to mention that her victims included elderly widows, young families, and hard-working people who just wanted to live in peace. Justice isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just a federal judge who got tired of being bullied and decided to remind someone what real authority looks like. They thought a $200 fine would make me back down. Instead, it cost them their freedom, their money, and their fake little empire. Martha Henderson learned the hard way that there's a big difference between real legal authority and playing dress-up with a clipboard. My daughters still talk about the night their dad took down the HOA. Emma wants to be a lawyer now, and Sophie says she wants to be a judge like her old man. Those garden gnomes are still in our front yard, and every time I see them, I'm reminded that sometimes standing up to bullies doesn't just protect you, it protects everyone. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have fought back or just paid the fine? Comment below and let me know. And if you enjoyed this story of HOA justice, hit that like button and subscribe, because I've got plenty more stories about what happens when people mistake authority for power. Trust me, the next one is even more satisfying.